Back in late 2019, I was riddled with stress in my geography class when I noticed a video made by Animation Wins countersinning my own terrible video trying to criticize the animated classic Don't Mine at Night. I made that video back when I was a dumb, stupid idiot child with dumb, stupid idiot opinions. Since even 2019 Posey hated 2017 Posey, I decided to leave a friendly comment on that video, and I got in touch with the creator, Hoovian103, who I then became friends with. Then in 2020, she brought me on as a co-writer, and then in 2021, when she lost motivation to run the channel, she gave it over to me, so, I run it now. Thanks, Hoovian. That initial interaction set forth a cascade of events that would cement me somewhat in the Minecraft animation community for the last few years, even though I haven't really animated anything. Now that I was entangled in this fine community, I was drawn to a particular project that was just on the cusp of coming out at the time, and I thought it was deeply interesting. That project was Songs of War was an animated fantasy series airing from November of 2019, 5 years ago as I meticulously planned, to March of 2020. It was meant to run for 3 seasons, but due to low viewership and other factors, it was cancelled after season 1. At first glance, I remember being extremely hyped for this show. It had been in the works for years, and it was made by my favorite animation studio at the time, Black Plasma Studios. They're loved by everyone except those pesky wasps at Animation Sins, but you know what? It's fine. They're out of commission now. I hear they used to care about stuff like animation quality and not having egregious clipping errors. Couldn't be me, truly. Anyway, the company has now rebranded to Squared Media for mysterious, unspecified reasons. I mean, who knows why? Just, don't look up my previous videos, or David R.B., the name of the guy who ran the company, who, directed Songs of War, who was the main writer and the main animator. I certainly wouldn't know anything. Okay, snarky humor aside, I don't actually have any problems with Squared Media, I just want to make that clear now. I understand that the rebrand was to symbolically cut ties with David for, being a child predator and all that, and that they couldn't really explain that to their mostly child audience. The Squared Media director team was extremely cooperative when I raised my concerns about David following my investigation in 2022. He was removed from the company, and he has had no position there since. I don't know the new boss, Matt Squared, super well, but I am confident that the studio is under better leadership with him than with David, by a pretty long shot. Oh, and obviously I never liked Animation Sins. Their nitpicking was terrible, including on Squared Media animations. Indeed, I hate nitpicking animation, which is why my video, instead, will be focused on nitpicking writing. Isn't that so much better? Isn't it? Isn't it? Isn't it? Songs of War is something that means a lot to me, and probably always will. Late 2019 was not the best part of my life, I have to say, considering my grandmother had just passed away from cancer. This new exciting Minecraft show piquing my interest was filling that hole in my heart just a little. The series also led to me joining the Black Plasma community, the Squared community as it is now. Kinda sounds like a bunch of mathematicians who love exponents, but whatever. Being anti-transphobia and all, I should probably avoid dead-naming the studio. The only thing that's acceptable to dead-name is Twitter. Okay, back on topic. Joining that community let me meet, half of my current friends, so that's pretty fucking great. I made a lot of memories in that community, and most of them are positive, so believe me when I say I want to come at this critique from a place of passion. And yeah, I know I titled this video as a retrospective, but it is also a critique. It is definitely a critique. Some of the writing in Songs of War, not all, is really, really bad. There is just no way around this. There are so many storytelling fumbles, it's kind of insane. That being said, there's definitely value to analyzing the problems and the good parts, because there still are some, right? I'm going to be revisiting the entire script for Songs of War, the good and the bad. So, strap in, I guess. Now on to everyone's favorite part of media analysis, the disclaimers. Firstly, it's important to mention Songs of War wasn't just made by David R.B. Sure, he came up with the idea, and sure, he was the director, and sure, he wrote most of the script, and sure, he animated most of the first season, and sure, he did a lot of other stuff, some of it actually illegal, but he was not the only one involved. Samuel Kyber, the co-director, doubtless contributed magnitudes to the project and helping David manage his team. Now, granted, we also found out he has grooming allegations against him. These ones I can't actually confirm because there's not enough evidence, but he also left the company when David did, so that's not an issue anymore. There's also Clemence Lassalle, if I pronounced that correctly. Although David was the main writer of Songs of War, Clemence was brought on to help, and she did a ton of the work on the script. In fact, my friend group has this running joke that, literally all the good parts of the script are her work, and that's probably not the absolute truth, but it is really funny to pretend like it is. Furthermore, you have tons of other people, like the script editors, or the map builders, or the skin designers, or the voice actors, or the animators who David allegedly underpaid, so that's nice. Point is, even though David has soiled a lot of my love for Songs of War, I still have a great respect for the rest of the team for all the work they did. Plenty of talented people were very, very passionate about Songs of War, and it shows. The scenery is wonderful, the animation is solid, the music is god tier, and the voice acting is consistently great across the board. I still remember when Tom Aglio tuned into that script reading session I was doing with my friends back in 2020, right after the script was released. He was so cool for that. Thanks, Tom. I just want you to know if you're watching this, you are super, super fucking cool. There's a lot to love about Songs of War, and I'm not trying to ruin it for all its fans. That's not what this video is about. If Songs of War means a lot to you, I am absolutely happy for you. It still means a lot to me, too. I just want to share my honest reassessment of the series' writing in its entirety. Comedic embellishment aside, I want to make sure my approach is a constructive one. Alright, time to get bitter. Previous attempts to criticize Songs of War's writing have been met with a response by fans that is well-meaning but flawed. It's something along the lines of, it doesn't make sense to criticize the story because, David said it was flawed in his commentaries and said he was going to rework it anyway if the series wasn't cancelled. It's been used a lot to shut down discussions of writing issues because it supposes that if the series had just kept going, David would have, magically fixed every problem that's being criticized. It's a pretty convenient out, I have to say, and it's not entirely wrong. David did recognize many of the problems in the script and point them out in his director commentary videos, which I will also be rewatching to form my opinion. They've been scrubbed from the internet now, but thankfully I downloaded them back in 2020 to listen to on summer car rides. I used to think David's voice was soothing. That's probably the most embarrassing fact about my past self I've ever admitted, and I used to be heavily invested in the Pink Sheep fandom back in 2016. However, I do not think that makes his writing immune from criticism, and that is for a multitude of reasons. First and most obviously, only the Season 2 and Season 3 parts of the script are actually unfinished. Season 1 is all fine and dandy. It is just as patched up as David wanted it to be. And it's not like Season 1 is completely free of issues, by the way. Secondly, assuming David was being honest when he said he wanted to revamp the script, there was a pretty limited amount of change he could actually make. All the voice actors from Season 1 had already recorded their lines all the way to the end of Season 3. How do I know this, you ask? Well, it's because David released all of their voice lines to the community after the series was cancelled. Allegedly without their consent, I might add. He already had his voice actors record their lines all the way to the end before reworking the script. At that point, if he wanted to change it, he would have had to alter only the dialogue of uncast characters, or he'd have to make his voice actors record all over again. The first option probably would have made the script even more disjointed, and worse. The second option would have forced more work upon those VAs, and frankly at no benefit to himself because he probably would have had to pay them more. I'm no expert at running projects like this, but if I were him, I probably would have capped their recording work at Season 1. As is, I'm left wondering how much David really could have improved the script with this massive fucking roadblock. The third and final reason why I don't accept the "it's unfinished" defense is because, frankly, I refuse to judge art based on a hypothetical. The better version of this script fans say would have existed does not exist, and that is a deliberate choice by David. He had the chance to improve it before releasing it to the public after he had cancelled the show. Absolutely nothing would have stopped him, including the problem I just mentioned, since he wouldn't have even needed voice actors at that point. He had the golden opportunity to make every single improvement he said he wanted to make instead of just talking about them. I'm not saying he was obligated to do that since, obviously he was busy with game development and also being a scumbag, but at the same time, he chose to spew his shit out there and leave it as it was. By his decree, this self-admitted work in progress is the best we're ever going to get. It's the final form Songs of War was ever allowed to have, so it's also the form I have to review. I really have no other options besides not making this video, and I need my self-fulfillment, okay? So in conclusion, no, I will not judge the magically better version of Songs of War no one ever made. I will judge the version of Songs of War someone did make and didn't make better. If you think that's unfair, I totally respect that, but it's my video, my rules, and you don't have to watch it or enjoy it. Now, that should be enough disclaimers, so let's finally get on with the review. The first season of Songs of War is incredibly strong. For 30 seconds, after which cracks immediately start forming. The season starts with a brief scene depicting Ingressus Voltaris, aka the Death Singer, dramatically standing victorious in the aftermath of a battle with opposing Ardoni forces. It's a bit more vague in the script compared to its finalized form in Season 1, where Ingressus is actually shown fighting the Ardoni and defending against an Ender Dragon. Then comes a cut to black and a voice line from Thalius Sendaris. Personally, I think this opening is fantastic. Right away, it works to hook the audience with a sense of intrigue, both in the way the scene is established and in the way Thalius' line is written. Next, we get a prologue serving us basic exposition about the lore, which is, not a great sign, but it's not necessarily the end of the world either. Prologues do tend to be a cheap workaround for writers who can't find a way to fit naturalistic exposition into their story, but it is possible for them to be done well. If you do find a way to justify a prologue in-universe, its usage comes off as a bit more clever. I have heard the argument that the Songs of War prologue is actually really smart writing because it instills the audience with surface-level knowledge about the world and its lore, only for the story to subvert that knowledge later. I can't show you anyone making that argument because it would have been on the old BPC Discord server that no longer exists after the David allegations went public, but I guess you'll just have to trust me when I say it's been made. Supposedly, the prologue is just intentionally putting forth a false narrative which masks a more complicated truth revealed later on, specifically in regards to the Voltaris. The Voltaris are initially made to look like outright villains, with them having been banished by the rest of the Ardoni. They are later revealed to be, still villains according to the story, but with at least a slight consideration of nuance as to how they became that way. Guys, the writing is actually really clever because the setup of this simplistic narrative gets subverted by the payoff of, this marginally less simplistic narrative. Alright, let me address that claim and explain why I disagree. The thing is, you don't need a prologue that reads like a de facto nature documentary opening and delivers all the information you'd expect to find in a Wikipedia article about the setting to build up a false narrative. You can also apply advanced techniques some of my favorite shows use, like having dialogue establish information naturally, or gradually using flashbacks to reveal parts of the lore. There are tons of situations which would justify lore tidbits coming up in character conversations. Half of this season is about the young and frankly sheltered Sen traveling with Thalius and learning stuff from him. I'm just saying, there are other options available here, and I honestly think I would prefer a gradual reveal of all the lore established in the prologue to, well, the prologue. You can still have cool flashbacks to the past as Thalius explains things with his epic voiceover. I certainly wouldn't want to give up Carl G. Brooks' narration. All you have to do is naturally establish lore in any way you want, and then flip it on its head later. When we get to Season 3, I'll talk about why I don't even think that's really a thing the script does, but let's not get too ahead of ourselves just yet. So, you don't like the narrative choice of introducing us to a lot of lore with the prologue, you say. But it does at least still make sense, right? Isn't it still logically justified for the prologue to happen because of the scene it leads into? And to that I say, After the prologue, we learn the narration was not actually from an objective narrator and instead from Thalius, who has been reading the Walls of Time to Håkon. These are basically historical inscriptions in a fortress in the far north of Ardonia. This leads to an admittedly funny joke where Håkon is revealed to have been asleep for most of the reading, and on the surface it does appear to justify the existence of the prologue. See, it actually is naturalistic storytelling because the characters are reading the whole thing in universe. Bravo, David. There's just one small problem. Why the fuck is this happening? No, really, why is Thalius reading to Håkon in the first place? Actually stopping to analyze this scene reveals that Håkon isn't learning anything new from listening to Thalius here. He is, quite literally, a scholar. It's his job to know what's on the Walls of Time as an absolute baseline. Hell, he confirms his knowledge is way deeper and calls the walls bungled in the process. There is absolutely nothing here that he needs to be told, which probably explains why he falls asleep midway through the read aloud. This then begs the question of why Thalius is doing the equivalent of reading Wikipedia to an academic. Right after waking up, Håkon hyper-focuses on one detail about the Great War that the Wall of Time Thalius just read to him doesn't even mention anyway. That detail is the location of the final battle between Ingressus and his rival, Achillean Nestoris, also known as the Tidesinger. He makes it clear that the battle took place at the peak of Mount Velgrin, a specification the writings on the Wall of Time leave out. Hawken, let me just level with you, buddy. Why is it that you're making Thalius read you the whole wall of time, exclusively containing information you already know, just to bring up the one relevant detail you know that it doesn't include? Obviously, we know why he brings it up. It's for him to segue into telling Thalius about the possible Voltaris presence at the peak. But couldn't he just start with that? Could he really not just meet with Thalius and skip past the bullshit to warn him about the possible Voltaris threat immediately? Well, he could, but then we would have to find a better way to weave in that prologue, right? It's like David has bent logic around a gaping hole he's shoving the prologue into like an infant child shoving a rectangular block into a cylindrical slot. I hate to sound like I'm nitpicking, but this is the way the writers chose to implement the prologue, and it doesn't make any sense logically. You need to justify why characters think, talk, and act the way they do. And unless you're deliberately introducing fourth wall breaks into your story, your characters need to act based on things that happen in-universe, and not based on out-of-universe decisions you make and decide have to be fulfilled. When you really stop and think about it, this scene is so bonkers that it would probably have been better to just tack the prologue on without trying to connect it to the rest of the episode at all. That's kind of frustrating to me. I'm not going to say much about Thalius and Hawken traveling to Mount Velgrin, or their investigation, or the first part of their confrontation with Tigran, since I don't have any glaring issues with those parts of the script. They're all pretty solid, and I especially like Tigran's introduction and the way the Voltaris are revealed in general. It's adapted far better visually, but it's still pretty strong here. However, there is one small instance of weird dialogue right after Tigran shows up that isn't really a huge deal, but is pretty funny, so I'm going to go over it. In the script, there was originally a part of this scene where Hawken throws snowballs at Tigran and wisecracks, leading to Tigran berating Hawken before turning back to Thalius. The writers decided later to cut this out, and I'm pretty sure it's because it would have unnecessarily ruined the tension, a decision I do agree with. However, hilariously, the writers didn't change Tigran's line immediately after the deleted segment, so it feels a little awkward because it very much seems like he's talking to one person and then to another without the first person saying anything in the finished scene for him to respond to. You could maybe argue Tigran's previous line introducing himself fixed this a little bit, since the "as for you" could show him shifting his focus from himself to Thalius instead of from Hawken to Thalius, but it still feels like there's something missing to me. Tigran just states his name, says nothing else about himself, and immediately goes back to addressing Thalius. There's nothing technically wrong here, but it does feel a little disjointed and could have used some reworking. A good tip I've heard from other writers is to read your dialogue out loud to make sure it sounds natural, and that has to be one of my favorite pieces of advice of all time. We then move on to the fight between Thalius and Tigran. This obviously looks incredible in animated form, thanks to the talent of Now Squared Media director Zillion, who took care of most of the fights in the season, with the rest going to another director, Skyfall. That being said, we are only looking at the script here, so the details of the fight are completely irrelevant. What I do want to address instead is the sacrifice and death of Hawken, which is actually a writing choice I quite like. Don't get me wrong, Hawken's a fun character despite the pretty illogical writing in his introduction, but he really doesn't need to survive for the story to progress. Killing him off helps establish Tigran and his Voltaris contingent as a huge threat. The writers demonstrate here in no uncertain terms that they are willing to not only kill characters, but also kill likable characters when they have reason to. To their credit, they continue on with this trend for the whole script, even though I don't think a lot of the deaths were particularly well done. Back to here though, Hawken's death also makes the audience legitimately fear for a good moment that Thalius will die too, which adds to the feeling of relief when he escapes. It's just really effective, and I'm glad this decision was made. Thank you for your great work, Tommy Tallarico, writer of songs. The episode ends with Thalius using his Mobilium song to escape from Tigran at the last minute and retreat from Mount Velgrin to safety by jumping over a gorge. There's a really great moment where he glares at the Voltaris who have lined up on the side of the gorge opposite to him, and they glare back, unable to reach him. It's there that the episode ends, and in my opinion, it is a really strong ending. If you've been paying attention, you'll notice I actually quite like a lot of Season 1, Episode 1. Save for the prologue, I genuinely call it a great episode. It works wonders to hook the audience with a very literal cliffhanger, and it also sets up Tigran and his followers as threats perfectly. If I was assigned to rewrite this episode, I would just start with the Ingressus introduction, then cut immediately to present day, have Hawken immediately approach Thalius about his suspicions about the Voltaris, and then carry on the episode from there. I'd hope that version of the episode would inspire more thought about who the Voltaris are in the first place, since it wouldn't immediately be answered in the prologue. That would raise a lot of questions that hopefully would have satisfying answers over the course of the story. Still, solid episode, let's hope this trend keeps up. Season 1, Episode 2 starts off with a scene introducing Jalkar and Grimm, two thieves working together to steal the dragon egg. There's some banter between them as Grimm has forgotten to bring Jalkar schematics of the castle the egg is in, and let me just say, I really like this scene. It's good characterization. We get a sense of Jalkar's arrogant and abrasive personality and Grimm's goofy side. I like it a lot. I especially like the gag where Grimm buys a new scythe because he thinks it looks cool and Jalkar laments him for buying from the people they're trying to steal from. It's great. It's funny. This is good writing. Now we have the scene where the egg is actually stolen. I think someone who's deliberately trying to find things to complain about would argue Jalkar should have suspected the egg would be redstone wired. But I think his arrogance and his carefree nature justify his failure to check in this instance. He's even self-aware, as the text here states in no uncertain terms. I accept it. Then there's the part where Grimm bumps into Jalkar and causes him to drop the egg. This is building upon the characterization we've already received in a pretty neat way while creating some intrigue about what'll happen next. Again, this scene is going along very well, and it continues like that all the way to the end. Overall, it's not anything particularly special, but it is functional and it's enjoyable. I want to make it clear right now that this is the baseline standard I hope the story is able to maintain. I'm not expecting a masterpiece at all reading this, which is honestly kind of generous compared to the pedestal some of the most dedicated fans have in their head. I've encountered people who have outright stated Songs of War is better than iconic franchises like Star Wars and Lord of the Rings, which I just disagree with. Though I suppose I would accept it being better than some parts of Star Wars if you want to get really technical about it. My point here is simply to establish what I expect of the script moving forward. Sen and Ria's introduction comes next. They're training in Sandaria and having some sweet banter. The dialogue is maybe a little bit generic at times, but there's nothing wrong here. The scene serves its purpose just fine in giving you an introduction to the characters. Thalius comes in midway through, and we learn through implication that he has some sort of relationship with Sen and Ria, being a mentor figure to them, or as I prefer to see it, their cool uncle. I should probably mention now that when Thalius gives Sen and Ria their songs, it serves as what would be a good opportunity for some naturalistic exposition about the songs to be delivered. I would certainly prefer that to what we got with the prologue. I like their interactions, and I continue liking them once Osivian joins in. Osivian is established as an overprotective but ultimately caring father to Ria. He's kind of like the anti-Condorman, if you know what I mean. Just a lot of solid characterization. There's just one small thing I want to address, and that is a line by Osivian mentioning Sen's heritage. He says here that he raised Sen as a member of the Sandaris clan, even though by blood he's not a Sandaris. This, of course, implies that there's something genetic determining which clan an Ardoni is a part of, or rather which color markings they have, which on its own makes sense, I think. It can be compared to how genes determine hair color, or eye color, or other things of the sort. The color of an Ardoni's markings by extension determines which clan they're considered to belong to. Sen is therefore implied to be genetically distinct from the Sandaris he's been raised with, despite the fact that he's more or less assimilated into Sandaris culture. I'd like you to put a pin in this and keep track of it because I'm going to revisit this much later. Specifically on June 14, 2025. After the aforementioned scene, Sen goes into his dwelling and looks intently at the song provided to him by Thalius. A good wordless moment for establishing his natural curiosity and the aura of the songs in general. This is good writing, again. David, you're doing it. Your script is solid. Or maybe Clemence is doing the work for you, but what do I know? Now, Lucan's introduction, and his conversation with Marcus. I don't have much to say here because, again, this scene is good. Plenty of solid characterization for Lucan and Marcus, and some naturally weaved-in exposition about Felden's resource shortage and mining industry. It's almost like they could have done this in pieces for the information the prologue delivered, but let's not get too bitter. We return to Sen and Ria as they share a moment in the song shrine in their village. It's nice. Since they're sheltered, it makes sense that she feels like she'll never go out into the greater world. And it's a sweet contrast that Sen is more hopeful about things. I like that there's an immediate follow-up to him giving her his spear in their previous scene together. However, I do finally have something to get pissy about now, and that is this information Ria reveals about how she's one of the last few female Ardoni. Let me make this clear. She is one of the last few female Ardoni. There are barely any of them, and that's further backed up by the script, given Ria is one of 2 named female Ardoni characters in the story, with the other being Val, who shows up way later in Season 2. I want you to make a guess on when the story addresses the implications of this very important world-building fact. I'll give you 5 seconds. Never. The answer is never.
No, I'm serious. There are only 3 more mentions of the phrase female Ardoni in the entire script. One of them is from Val's introduction at the start of Season 2, and it's just in the action text and establishes that she is in fact a female Ardoni. The other two are on page 444 after the literal resolution of the story at the end of Season 3. They're both in the epilogue, and they're both just placeholder names for unidentified characters. This still doesn't bring up the topic that needs to be addressed. I'm losing my mind here. Look, when you just casually reveal that a species has barely any members of a particular sex left, that demands more explanation. It just has so many implications. It's fine that blood determines marking color, that makes sense on the surface. It doesn't really need to be explained further, at least not yet. The idea that female Ardoni are basically on the edge of extinction is not like that. That does not make sense on the surface, and it is never explained. We are never told once about how this affects the rest of Ardoni society. Assuming they reproduce sexually, because, we don't really have any reason to think otherwise. The massive disparity in sex is a huge problem for maintaining a stable population. How do the Ardoni get around these, you may ask? We do not know. Is polyamory common practice? No idea. Are there other methods of reproduction? Not a clue. Can the men get pregnant? Is Ardoni mpreg canon? Why am I asking that question? Okay, you might think it's weird my mind is going here, but they open Pandora's box here. You can't just drop a world-building detail that begs these questions and then not answer them. If you're not prepared to explore shit like this in your writing, just don't introduce it. It's not like the rest of the script even needs there to be few female Ardoni left. The rest of the script doesn't give a shit. I'm pretty sure this only exists to give Osivian a justification for being overprotective of Rhea. That's kind of weak sauce though because of two things. One, she's his child, someone he loves and cares for on a fundamental level, so you don't really need that justification anyway if it's not going to come up ever again. And two, Osivian is killed off-screen, and then no one mentions him again. No one cares about any of this after he dies. So to recap, we have this confusing world-building detail that is never explained and only inserted into the story for one purpose that gets forgotten about almost immediately. Why would you do this? Don't open a can of worms if you don't want them slithering all over your fucking story. By the way, we never even find out why there are so few female Ardoni, so that's awesome. The shrine scene switches to a conversation between Thalius and Osivian, wherein Thalius warns Osivian about the Voltaris on Mount Valgrind. Again, good stuff. Solid exposition about the Masters being largely ineffective and ignoring Thalius and whatnot. After that, Sen turns out to be eavesdropping, and Osivian nearly punishes him until Thalius, like the cool uncle he is, bails him out and offers to take him on an adventure. I like this part too, but Sen does raise a good point when he says Rhea would have wanted to join them. We don't really get an explanation on why Thalius is taking him on this adventure and not her, even though they're both curious about the outside world. I guess maybe Osivian wouldn't allow it since he's obviously a lot more protective of Rhea, but given how trusted of a friend Thalius is and how skilled of a warrior he is as well, I guess it still makes sense for Osivian to say no, but at the same time, you're kind of doing the writer's job for them in justifying this decision. You could also say Thalius wants Sen with him so he can talk to Sen about his past in Season 1, Episode 5, which, yeah, true, but it's not like Rhea being with him would necessarily stop that from happening. At any point, Thalius could just pull Sen aside and talk to him in private. I don't know, it's not a huge deal, but I do think this scene could have been improved somewhat by just a bit of dialogue hinting at Osivian's potential disapproval of Rhea joining in. That's all. To close off my analysis of the second episode, let's look at the establishing scene of Abigail, one of my favorite characters, as those of you who remember my ranking video in late 2021 will know. I'm hoping this more critical reread won't spoil her for me, but at the very least, this scene doesn't. She comes in quite naturally and in a way that successfully builds intrigue. It's a cool scene in general, and the environment is well established. The choice to set the scene of nature first, and then reveal Abigail within is pretty clever. And of course, the episode ending on her discovering the dragon egg is another reasonable choice, and results in a gripping hook. Thus ends Season 1, Episode 2, which, to be honest, was mostly good. I feel like I gave off the impression I would be more harsh than I actually am, but don't worry, that is coming. I need to clarify that these writers are actually pretty good at setting up aspects of their story. They are just not good at delivering on them. And I really do mean that, because you're gonna see so much of that come Season 2 and Season 3. That's why so many of these early scenes in Season 1 work so well. The setup is good. The payoff just turbo sucks. Season 1, Episode 3 begins with a scene of Lucan lamenting his current situation as he goes to work in the mines. His characterization continues effectively.
I'd even go as far as to say he has some of the strongest characterization out of anyone in this show, and certainly anyone featured in this season. We're then introduced to Eddie, the guard assigned to protect Lucan. He's a funny character. I quite like him. He's basically a drunkard, and there's a gag where he keeps talking about his life to Lucan, who couldn't give less of a shit. It's great, and it opens an opportunity for some good naturalistic dialogue. To be frank, Eddie is probably so drunk that he actually sees hallucinations regularly, as implied by this line. This comes up again in one of the funniest moments of the entire script. Keep that in mind. So anyway, Eddie fucking dies. I was making that up. There is no future moment with him. He's just dead. Truly tragic. I'm not going to say much about the rest of this scene. The undead come in and attack the miners, and Lucan has to fend them off before the episode gets to Abigail. There's nothing wrong with it, and it's quite an effective scene for dramatic tension, as is. Abigail inspects the dragon egg and takes it back to the farm of Mr. Finch, her guardian, I'm assuming? We don't really ever get told what their relationship is, so that's cool. Either way, this leads to one of the most iconic lines in the entire series, purely because it was memed to oblivion.
They call me Death Singer.
Did you at least harvest the sugar cane?
We get more dialogue between Abigail and Mr. Finch, where the latter establishes Abigail's parents were farmers. Again, no elaboration is ever given on how Mr. Finch knew her parents, so don't get too curious about that. In fact, that's a motto for a lot of this show. If you're interested in finding out more about the backstory of a lot of these characters, you're probably fucked. Anyway, Mr. Finch sees the dragon egg, even though Abigail tries to hide it. I'm not exactly sure why she tries to hide it, but it doesn't work. Weirdly, Mr. Finch calls it a dragonstone and not an egg, presumably due to a lack of knowledge, but the script never explains what he's confusing the egg with. Presumably, a dragonstone is just a more general artifact found in the end and not quite a dragon egg. Not to get too ahead of myself, but in Season 1, Episode 5, another character named Darlene distinguishes the two and tells Abigail she's carrying a dragon egg, not a dragon stone. Now, why does she know the difference and not Mr. Finch? They are both farmers, after all. Darlene doesn't seem like she should be in the know if no one else is. Now, obviously you could argue maybe she just reads shit a little more than Mr. Finch, which, fair enough. However, what that does not explain is that there is another party strangely ignorant about what the dragon egg actually is. The soldiers from Concord assigned to track it down. No, seriously, the Kingdom of Concord is sending out horse riders to track down the egg, and even this one in this scene calls it the Dragonstone. Wait, scratch that. The Dragonstone. Is there just one of them now? All the other characters say a Dragonstone, implying there's more. Why is this horse rider the most uneducated on the matter? Aren't they being specifically assigned to find it? You could argue they're trying to hide its true nature, but then why does Darlene know? She's just a farmer! On top of that, we never learn what a Dragonstone actually is. It's only in the script as this thing that supposedly exists that other characters have confused the egg for. What's the point of writing this in? Nothing would meaningfully change about the story if everyone just correctly referred to the dragon egg as a dragon egg. Okay, I get this is nitpicky, but this is exactly why you need to interrogate your dialogue choices. Letting things like this slide in your writing makes it so much clunkier and so much less understandable compared to if you go back and do the revisions. This is exactly the sort of thing you need to iron out in your second draft. Reminder, this is the finished season, so I'm presuming the script got to that point. Nevertheless, this is still the final dialogue. Anyway, Mr. Finch puts the egg inside, telling Abigail things like it are beyond her. He doesn't really elaborate on this point, and it's also really funny when you consider a decision he makes in this exact same episode later, but that's about where the scene ends. Although it does have some problems, as I've already mentioned, it's generally a nice scene for establishing Abigail's character, so it's definitely not all bad. Meanwhile, Sen and Thalia set out on their adventure, with Osivian sending them off. Nothing to note here, this scene is solid. We then transition to a cool travel montage leading into another scene where Sen and Thalius are talking by a fire. During their conversation, Thalius mentions the Great War and shows Sen the Mobilium Prime, which he currently has in his possession. Later, he'll give it to his trusted friend to protect it from Tigran and his followers. Do put a pin in that, however. He also explains how Osivian's family has kept the Prime since the Great War, since it was decided it was too dangerous for Prime songs to remain with the Masters. This implies Osivian gave it to Thalius for safekeeping just in case he was telling the truth, which he was, or maybe Thalius just stole it, which would be way funnier. This scene works as exposition and further solidifies Sen's curiosity. However, I do think it's made weaker by the existence of the prologue, which is an unfortunate pattern with many of these scenes. Imagine how much more thought-provoking all the information we learned here would be if we didn't already know most of it. Imagine hearing the Great War with no context for the first time in this scene. Imagine if this was the first time you heard about the Prime songs and got to wonder what those were. The scene doesn't even need better writing to be better, it just needs better context. This is why, if you should avoid it, you should never start your story with an exposition dump. It robs your audience of the chance to discover information naturally. It also makes them feel like you don't trust them to figure it out. Audiences love being able to figure out mysteries, or at least I know I do. Some of my favorite scripts come from the two Knives Out movies by Rian Johnson. They have some of the most satisfying mysteries I've ever had the pleasure of unraveling, complete with unconventional storytelling tactics to enhance them further. I'm not saying a fantasy series has to be held to the same standard as a mystery plot when it comes to building intrigue. I am saying that at the very least, you should probably let your audience discover basic facts about your story without immediately shoveling a block of them in their faces. Also, this is way more of a nitpick, but there's an awkward line here where Thalius says, after the Masters were targeted by the Death Singer before the Great War, it was decided the songs, referring to the Primes of course, were too dangerous to remain with the Masters. You may notice the usage of the word Masters twice in the same sentence, which is a general no-no when it comes to prose and dialogue. Repeating the same noun twice or more in a sentence without valid reasoning tends to kill the flow and make it sound robotic. I wrote an entire explanation on how this works so long it spanned 5 whole pages of the script, but I cut it out after realizing it would kill the pacing even more than the rest of my writing already has. It's just going to be linked in the description now, and it might even be made into its own video sometime. Yay! I'm not going to pick at every single line with these sorts of issues, mostly because this video would be way too long if I did, but it's still worth pointing out the underlying problem of awkward dialogue. You really want to make sure you get these things right if you want your story to flow well for your audience. And tell, for your own satisfaction. Of course, I should add that mistakes are easily forgivable, as you can always go back and correct them later, like David surely must have before having Carl G. Brooks record the line and putting it in the finished episode. Wouldn't it be really funny if he didn't change it?
After the Masters were targeted by the Death Singer before the Great War, it was decided that the songs were too dangerous to remain with the Masters.
Guys, holy shit, I just realized the music increases while Thalius is saying that line, and his voice fades out because Sen is focusing on the Mobilium Prime, and the scene is from his perspective. The reason I never caught the issue before is because the scene tricks you into not recognizing it's still the same line the whole way through. This was probably unintentional, but that means After Infinity did more to solve this than David did. He's not even a writer. He didn't even touch the script. I'm going to lose it. Okay, I gotta move on to the next scene. It's for my own sanity at this point. Lucan is found barely alive after escaping the mines from earlier in this episode and is presumably nursed back to health outside the scene. He is then summoned before 2 Felden government officials to be questioned about the attack that left him so injured. He's asked explicitly by one of them to describe what happened in detail, only to summarize it by speaking 2 short sentences and showing them a wither skull. That's funny. I like to imagine there's an alternate universe where Lucan wrote out a full 10-page essay on the attack complete with MLA citations. The C in his name stands for credible. Anyway, when the officials see the Wither Skull, they both mention rumors about the necromancers, who are, of course, using the skulls to control the undead. Interestingly, they appear to have heard the rumors independently and never discussed them one-on-one before, which is odd considering they clearly see the necromancers as a legitimate threat to Felden. I don't know why. I mean, your co-workers, did that topic really never come up? I guess not. The officials proceed to assign Lucan to investigate the necromancers, claiming he still owes Felden his service because of the crimes he's committed in the past. Just kidding, I edited the script. No, I didn't. That's completely real. Seriously, this is their actual plan. There are layers to how bad of a decision this is on the part of the officials. For one thing, Lucan is the only survivor from the recent necromancer attack as far as the script tells us. He also doesn't seem to have that much combat experience, so it's difficult for him to defend himself if he's caught investigating the necromancers. Sending him on a mission that will likely endanger his life is highly irresponsible, considering any potential recount of his first-hand experience could be lost forever. There's a lot more he could offer beyond what he says in this scene, and these officials should be pressing for more if this is of any concern to them. However, not only is risking Lucan's death a huge problem with their plan, so is entrusting Lucan with the investigation in the first place. You see, back in 2020, and I do promise there's a reason I'm bringing this up, I got into a bit of spat with people on the BPC Discord about my favorite Songs of War character, Captain Kyoshi. My opponents were arguing he was selfish and just generally an asshole with some pretty weak, pretty silly points. My favorite moment was when someone made up a false interpretation of a scene that completely went against the director's own words. I quote, "When he saw Felden burning, he was worried how that would make him lose popularity." Quick trigger warning for David's voice.
You may have noticed that the final shot of this storyline was on Kiyoshi, though not Lucan or Nika. He's the one who's responsible for protecting this kingdom, and he just lost an entire city to the necromancers due to a bad move. He's going to be feeling the weight of this war, and we're going to see a lot more of that in the future.
Anyway, I didn't just mention that because I'm petty. I mean, I am, but that's not the whole reason. One of the arguments my opponents made was that Kiyoshi does not deserve to be captain of the guard because he's not the main character of the arc. I don't think I need to explain the problem with that. The main character of the Felden arc is Lucan, and he is not fit to be captain at all, unlike Kiyoshi, who definitely is. Just because a character is important in a story does not justify them being given some sort of role or position or assignment that wouldn't make sense for them logically. So about that, David. Lucan should not be qualified for this mission to investigate the necromancers. I can see the rationale to an extent that because he's a thief, he's good at sneaking around, but this is not enough to justify it for me. He's a petty thief, as Marcus implies his crimes are usually minor in episode 2. Realistically, he shouldn't have the skill to properly infiltrate a group like the necromancers with no help. I mean, I'm not trying to argue he doesn't, because he clearly does. We know because he succeeds. The point is, from the perspective of the officials, they shouldn't believe he'll be good to go on his own. I can see it making sense for them to assign him as an informant on a mission like this, but the scene is showing they consider the necromancers an actual threat, so they should at least think about sending out a full team of specially trained people who can do his job much better. Hell, at least give him a partner. Lord knows he only makes it later because of the partner he does get, that being Nika, who does not work for Felden, and who he meets by circumstance. Anyway, we cut to Abigail, and there's a sweet little montage of her performing the act of farming, something I will never understand as a person who grew up in the suburbs. After that, this is where the horse rider I mentioned earlier talks to Mr. Finch. Mr. Finch lies to the horse rider and says he doesn't know about the egg while Abigail hides it. He later reveals when talking to Abigail he intends to sell the egg for a lot of money, which I guess is a logical train of thought considering how valuable he knows it to be. He asks for Abigail to give him the egg, though she drops it while trying to do so, which causes him to get weirdly pissed. Like, I understand being a little annoyed since the egg is so valuable, but the sheer venom in this line is completely out of whack considering how kind to Abigail he's been up until this point. Like, what the fuck warranted him bringing her parents into this and telling her reckless actions like hers got them killed? Jesus Christ, dude, why? Also, don't expect to ever learn what he's implying by this or any other information on Abigail's parents at all, because it never comes up again in the script, not even once. Nice one, Dave. Anyway, Abigail storms off, and that's pretty much where the episode ends. It's not a bad ending, save for the really weird mood shift of Mr. Finch and the lack of follow-up on what his dialogue is implying, but the latter is not this episode's fault. So episode 4 has a pretty sick opening, I'm not gonna lie. Abigail has a vision of Pythus conquering the end, something he ends up trying to do far later in the story. It's some interesting foreshadowing, and it's also just a cool scene. It's made cooler because the setup here, unlike most of the time, actually has good payoff in the end. I know what you're gonna say here. Noah, isn't that just the bare minimum for a good story? And you may be right. Abigail wakes up only to overhear Jalkar and Grimm taking the dragon egg from Mr. Finch, who Jalkar knocks out. Abigail confronts Jalkar, who immediately responds with misogyny, although that does nothing to deter Abigail from demanding he unhand the egg and leave. Jalkar gives the egg to Grimm and proceeds to fight Abigail. Abigail performs impressively against Jalkar, although he still manages to defeat her. I've seen people imply Abigail shouldn't have been able to contend with Jalkar given his skill, but it's pretty clear he's toying with her, as he likes to do with his opponents, especially at this point in the story. The moment he realizes he actually has to get serious to win, he knocks Abigail out in an instant, so I hardly think this is unrealistic. The episode cuts to Lucan. He meets Nika while on his mission, who mistakes him for a necromancer and launches an attack. Once their misunderstanding is cleared up, they both head to Nika's treehouse and properly introduce each other, followed by Lucan extorting Nika into helping him by stealing her possessions, which we all know is how true love starts. Unironically though, these two do have one of my favorite dynamics in not just this season, but the entire series. I have nothing negative to say about this scene. It perfectly introduces Nika's character and further fleshes out Lucan. Now, you may have noticed I've been complimenting this episode a lot. Unfortunately, we're about to hit a road bump. Thalius and Sen arrive in Oakendale, the capital of the Kingdom of Concord. On their way in, Sen notices a different species, Magnerites. Thalius tells him not to make eye contact with the Magnerites and shields him from their gaze, displaying what comes off as clear prejudice on his part.
That's right, folks, Thalius is emitting Hitler particles, a top-secret Minecraft feature Notch put in and Mojang had to turn off later. And thus, the script introduces the single most muddied theme in all of Songs of War, bigotry. Bigotry in Songs of War is represented with the treatment of Magnerites, which is handled badly, and with the treatment of the other Ardoni clans toward the Voltaris, which is actually barely handled at all. Still badly, though. Can you believe that a Minecraft animated series with a writer and director who obsessively fetishized Asian women might not be able to handle this subject with tact?
But let's be fair and not jump too far ahead. For now, this moment in a vacuum is not a problem. In fact, it's kind of interesting to see a character casually display prejudice, especially one we're supposed to view at this point as ostensibly moral. It helps establish the idea that Thalius is a more interesting, multifaceted character and not some sort of flawless hero. Does the series engage with that idea well later down the line? I'll let you guess.
As with many things in Songs of War, the problem lies less with the initial setup and more with the, well, everything else.
Anyway, Thalius and Sen head through Oakendale to a beacon. These are used to near instantly travel across long distances through some unexplained form of magic. It looks very cool visually, and I especially like that at first it looks like Thalius and Sen are going up, then going down.
Unfortunately, I am legally barred from judging any scene by visuals, and if I do so, I will be sued by myself for breaking my own arbitrary rules.
Using the beacon, Thalius and Sen travel to the city Crown Peak, which is one of the weirdest locations to consider when looking at the script's lackluster world building. We'll get into that more later, but for now, the basics are that none of the 6 kingdoms own the city, and it seems to be run by its own authority that we simply do not see or hear about ever, so that's nice. Thalius claims that Crown Peak was once the Ender King's seat of power when Ender Knights ruled Ardonia, before the last king, Rendor, split the world into 6 kingdoms after the people rebelled.
So, this raises quite a few questions. Let's play a game and see how many of those are sufficiently answered by the story. First off, let's look at the implied rebellion. Why did the people rebel against Rendor? Unexplained. Why did he acquiesce? Unexplained. The script never explores the motivations of either party, even though interest is piqued in the audience. Did people have grievances against the Ender Knights that warranted a rebellion? And what sort of grievances at that? Did it have to do with taxation, or oppression, or a lack of transparency? Did all the different kingdoms and cultures want political freedom more than they relied on the Ender Knights for the security they may or may not have provided? These are all questions I can see naturally forming in response to this line. As for Rendor's decision, why? Did he legitimately see the errors in his leadership, or was he pressured into stepping down by the rebellion? We also get nothing about this, as Rendor's character has barely any significance in the story.
Would you believe me if I told you the rebellion as a whole is literally only mentioned once in the entire script in this scene? Because it is. And furthermore, can we talk about the idea of the Ender Knights ruling Ardonia? I don't know what that means, and neither will you before and after reading the script. The problem with claiming the Ender Knights ruled Ardonia is that we see what the Ender Knights actually do in the story after they reform in Season 2, and their actions have nothing to do with ruling. The one Ender Knight who does try to rule, Alistair, is explicitly a villain. The Ender Knights are also said during the prologue to have returned from absence to fight in the Great War. This, again, points more toward them being a group of warriors than a group of rulers. As such, Thalius saying they used to rule Ardonia would be tantamount to saying the Avengers ruled Earth in the MCU. Granted, all depictions of the Ender Knights take place after Rendor gave the kingdoms independence, so maybe their role changed during the Great War, but that is never explained or elaborated on in the script, so it still fails at fleshing out this aspect of the world building. After that, Thalius explains to Sen that one of the kingdoms, Carthen, recently attacked its neighboring kingdom, Cydonia, and withdrew from the Union, whatever that is, seeing as it is never explained or mentioned again in the script. Anyway, after traversing more of the city, Thalius and Sen arrive at the home of Solomon, an old associate of Thalius who seems to be on friendly terms with him still. Thalius entrusts Solomon with the Mobilium Prime, and there's not much to note here, as I don't have any major problems with this scene.
That being said, there is one thing I will complain about. The relationship between Thalius and Solomon, like the relationship between Thalius and Hawken, is never elaborated on or explored again. In the greater context of the script, Solomon is a plot device, not a character. That wouldn't inherently be a problem, but he's also kind of a stupid plot device. He's a sleazy businessman whose sole purpose in the story is to receive the Mobilium Prime and then fork it over to the villains in Season 2.
He's a twist villain, basically. I'm so sorry, Schaeferless. You can't escape. Obviously not every character has to be fleshed out, but the nature of this dynamic begs questions the script refuses to answer. We're expected to believe Thalius trusts Solomon will keep the Prime safe, but the very first thing he does when presented with a threat is immediately give it over. We never learn anything else about their history. The only reasoning Thalius gives is that Solomon is good at evading the law and running an underground business, which, true, but that still doesn't explain why he trusts him with the Prime. Yeah, Solomon can hide the Prime, but how does Thalius know he will? He's clearly wrong, because Solomon doesn't hide the Prime. The writers are kind of just making Thalius seem like a dumbass, I'm not gonna lie. Anyway, before we move on, I just want to linger on this specific line of dialogue for no particular reason. I just think it's neat. After Thalius and Sen leave Solomon's house and head back to Sendaria, the episode cuts to Abigail waking up in the aftermath of Jalkar's attack. Mr. Finch expresses concern for her and laments over the situation, telling her not to get involved. However, Abigail stands up for herself and insists on tracking Jalkar before running off. I honestly really like this scene. It's a nice defining character moment for Abigail, even if it's not particularly deep or interesting in the same way as much of the payoff-less setup for world building we just talked about. For what it's worth, Season 1 Episode 4 ends on a high note. So anyway, Episode 5 begins with Lucan saying he's into cat girls. Episode 5 opens with a necromancer approaching Lucan and demanding to know where Nika is. Lucan responds with this iconic line, pissing off the necromancer before Nika comes in and the fight breaks out. After Nika knocks this necromancer out, she tells Lucan she plans on infiltrating the necromancer base wearing this one's robes. Lucan, however, points out he's a human male like the necromancer and Nika is a Felina female, meaning they'll be more suspicious of her. In any case, they're able to figure out where the base is because the necromancer has obsidian in their inventory and that points to the only volcano around, Mount Tempest. I don't know why this necromancer was just casually carrying obsidian and that's never explained, so cool. Anyway, I'm done complaining for now because the next bit has some solid banter and characterization as Lucan and Nika approach the entrance to Mount Tempest. I especially like Lucan's casual mention of the Riverstead prison, and his certainty of its existence before he pulls back when he realizes he's giving too much of himself away. It's a good way of establishing his insecurity about his criminal status, which is interesting and adds a new dimension to his character beyond the carefree demeanor we know from him. This is great. More of this, please. In the next scene, after Lucan enters the mountain, we return to Thalius and Sen on their way back from Solomon's. Both are in an inn, man, that's a hard phrase to get right, and Sen wakes up and speaks with Thalius in the middle of the night. I like the little tidbit about Thalius' song-induced insomnia, and this is actual setup for an aspect of the songs that's explored later, which is nice to see. Sen randomly bringing up the Great War would normally be a bit of a cheap way to prompt exposition, but Sen is a naturally curious character who knows Thalius was a big part of that war and is currently in a good position to ask about it, so I think this is forgivable. Take from this that a conversation starter should always have justification weaved into the character speaking up. The topic has to be something that would reasonably be on their mind considering their personality and the context around them. That's not to say this scene is perfect, though. This line is a little corny, and this paragraph kind of reads like a ChatGPT generation at the end. Seriously, you do not need that diverse people and factions bit. Just leave it at so many. The point is made. Hell, you could even just write his true powers were unity and leadership or something like that. Viewers, please avoid bloated dialogue. Make it as succinct as it can be, as long as your idea still gets across effectively and naturalistically. The next paragraph is better, though you could probably cut out the second sentence and keep the idea that our Doni leave behind their songs when they die as an implication for now. Otherwise, nothing wrong here. After the conversation stalls, Sen brings up another topic, that being where he's from. By the way Thalius pauses, it feels as though he's been asked this question before and hasn't wanted to disclose it until now, which helps the next course of the conversation feel more genuine. Thalius reveals that Sen's parents were killed by the Voltaris, put a pin in that by the way, and that he was unable to save any of his siblings. He then reveals no one but Osivian would take him in because he was a clanless child, and that Osivian named him Sen after the Sendaris clan to signify he would be a part of the community. This is a nice moment that fleshes out Osivian as more than just an overbearing father, though maybe it would be better if we saw some more dimensionality to him elsewhere. It's better than nothing, at least, since we know he cares a lot for Sen, and this scene does its job in that regard.
This next part of the scene was actually redacted for the final episode, and I do agree with that decision since it's unnecessary and detracts from the atmosphere. The writers seem to sometimes realize when something doesn't work, which makes it all the more baffling that so many other problems slip through the cracks, but I appreciate the attempts were made to patch things up at all. Anyway, the conversation just about ends with one really good line from Thalius, and the scene cuts there. We then get a scene of Abigail pursuing Jelcar and Grimm, stopping them from stealing Darlene's horses. You better remember who Darlene is, you Anyway, the scene's fine. Jelcar's dialogue is good, Abigail chases them away and then talks to Darlene, which is how we get the clarification on the dragon egg. This is silly, but I already went over that, so let's just move on. Abigail ventures onward to the Tabora Crags, where Jelcar and Grimm are apparently hiding to bypass Concord's borders. At least, I think that's what this line means, but I can't really tell because it's worded really weirdly. The point is, she's following them into the trench. We cut back to Thalius and Sen as they're approaching Sendaria. The two share one last conversation, and Sen thanks Thalius for the journey. It's a sweet moment, followed up by the reveal that Sendaria is on fucking fire! This moment is impeccable in the final episode. I mean, if you were watching that in 2020, there's a non-zero chance you shit yourself. The foundation for this scene in the script is just as strong. The way Timber starts whinnying, followed by Thalius telling Sen to stop moving forward out of fear he'll see something that scars him, followed by the reveal of the fire itself, it's all amazingly done.
This is easily the strongest ending to any episode thus far, proving Thomas the Tallarico engine has his moments. I mean, he cooked so hard, it burned down Sen's village.
And now we move on to episode 6. Jelcar and Grimm are meeting up with a contingent of Voltaris led by the very slimy and very stupid Zenaida, who despite having a perfectly good deal with the mercenaries, squanders it by threatening to kill them and starting a fight he notably does not win.
That's not necessarily a criticism, mind you, although I will say I do wish Zenaida had had more time to be fleshed out in the narrative. Patterns of actions from certain characters can better justify why they act the way they do. Not a big deal, though.
You know what I will criticize, though? This bit right here where Lucidius states Grimm might be the Reaper, and Jelcar seems to affirm his suspicions. The only other time this title is mentioned is by Hubris in Season 2, who says it's a nickname Grimm's enemies have for him, which is fine. It's cute, actually. Obviously, it's a reference to the Grim Reaper, and that's neat.
What's not so cool is that there's no explanation on why Grimm has this reputation or who his enemies even are. If this was just a cute throwaway line in Season 2, then that would be fine, but this is set up to be a big deal all the way back in Season 1, which makes the payoff rather disappointing. I just want to remind you, the first person to bring up Grimm's reputation is Lucidius, a member of the Voltaris clan, a group which has been living on a mountain for 154 years, near completely isolated from the rest of Ardonian society. Grimm has to be a huge deal if even they know about this, but no! We never get any indication of that again. It's so bizarre.
Regardless, the ensuing fight scene is pretty good, and I especially love Jelcar's finishing move where he uses Zenaida's song against him. Once the Voltaris besides Lucidius are dead, Jelcar and Grimm have to leave to find a new buyer, and Abigail arrives to speak to Lucidius. It's a nice little conversation with solid dialogue, and the fact that Lucidius expects Abigail to kill him is a sad reminder of how much certainty the Voltaris have that anyone outside their community will treat them with disdain. It's reassuring that Abigail's kindness outweighs the prejudice many others have, even though obviously Lucidius isn't the nicest person and she's not obligated to show him respect. Now we go back to Lucan, who is infiltrating the Necromancer base. I will gladly praise this scene. The build-up as Lucan figures out how to avoid the hostile mobs of Mount Tempest, only for him to be cornered by too many to face at once and rescued by Zarya. It's all great. Zarya, a high-ranking necromancer questioning Lucan, decides to trust him for now, though the next episode demonstrates he has a sneaking suspicion that Lucan is, in fact, an imposter. Anyway, it's here we see the Necro Base, which is a bit of a goofy and kind of pointless name, but in all other ways, this is a terrifying scene. Well constructed, too. When the Necrolord himself appears, let me tell you, that shit was hype in animation format, and it's not too shabby here in the script either, with the mention of hostile mobs growing loud and excited over his arrival. Lucan is assigned on a new mission by Zarya, and the scene ends. This brings us to what is by far the best stretch of Songs of War Season 1, and that is the fight at Sendaria. At first, Sen rushes toward his home, but Thalius stops him and orders him to stay put while he looks for survivors. Sen, of course, being the natural, curious little scamp he is, can't do this for long. He checks Rhea's place, finding nothing and no one, before Thalius returns and states in no uncertain terms that the two of them must leave. Let me tell you, this was earth-shattering to watch in 2020. After Infinity's music and the voice acting by Carl G. Brooks help the tense atmosphere immeasurably, but the sense of dread is palpable even on the page. Thalius doesn't even need to say he hasn't found any survivors when he returns to Sen. His silence on the matter and his single-minded determination to rescue Sen despite his devastation is deafening all on its own. Even small things like Timber's whinnying enhance the scene so much, ironically breathing life into a scene defined by death. Sen and Thalius are confronted by Voltaris. As Sen escapes, Thalius holds them off, killing all the Voltaris in his path. Shout out to the spear wielder who actually puts up a fight, but he dies too. It's then that Tigran shows up and speaks to Thalius again, taunting him, blaming him for the atrocities he's committed, and swearing to kill him once and for all. Tigran at this point in the story is a menacing and interesting villain with plenty of character potential. Anyway, Thalius insists he will not let the Voltaris plan succeed, and puts up his last fight against Tigran. Though he almost wins, he chooses to run to Sen over finishing off Tigran, allowing Tigran to grab the spear from his fallen comrade and hurl it into Thalius' body. Some have said Thalius failing to finish Tigran off is illogical and stupid, and you know what? Sure, maybe. I see where the criticism is coming from, but we also know Thalius cares a lot about Sen at this point. I don't personally think he wanted to kill Tigran here. I think he wanted to knock Tigran down just long enough so he could help Sen. In my opinion, that makes sense for Thalius' character, but you know, maybe they could have restructured the scene a little bit. Who knows? It's not a big deal to me. Still an absolutely amazing scene. Thalius breathes in and out heavily before he falls over, his songs appearing next to him as he dies. The Voltaris chase Sen, but he escapes on Timber, and Tigran walks over to Thalius' sword and picks it up, leaving Season 1 Episode 6 off on the perfect cliffhanger. Episode 6, setting aside some minor nitpicks, is what really sold me on the show when it was still releasing. I actually almost lost interest during the mid-season break between Episode 5 and Episode 6, but when this came out, I was locked the fuck back in. Maybe that's an autistic hyperfixation thing, but that is also a testament to how hard this shit went. I can't think of a greater indication of the potential Songs of War had. In Episode 7, we return to the Necromancer plotline. Zarya, Lucan, and some other necromancers are going after Nika, and when Lucan tries to avoid burning down her treehouse, that's when Zarya finally concludes he must be a traitor. I love test of loyalty moments, and this one really works. Not to mention, these lines go pretty damn hard. That one about feeding Nika to the spiders still makes my skin crawl to this day, and not just because there's a 50% chance it was written by a child predator. Anyway, Nika shows up and starts kicking ass, leading to a misunderstanding where she almost attacks Lucan until she realizes it's him. She then tries to recover her information, as her treehouse is up in flames at this point, but Lucan convinces her to leave it behind and save her own life. The two arrive at a river where Lucan pushes Nika into the water after she explicitly tells him Felina's hate water. This isn't like a criticism or anything, but it's kinda funny how in any other context this would be a huge asshole move. Thankfully, Lucan is the kind of guy who'd only shove his future girlfriend into a river to save her from certain doom and not for any other reason. We love a king like that. When Lucan and Nika escape, they share a solemn conversation about what just happened, right after some appropriately funny banter. I absolutely love the way Lucan immediately reassures Nika and tells her he found the necrobase, and that her hunting paid off. Obviously, this is just base-level kindness, but it feels so genuine and human in a way many other parts of the script do not, and that's what makes it land for me. The chemistry between these two is always something I've looked back fondly on. I was honestly worried it wouldn't hit the same for me on reread, but nope, Nikan is still a high point, at least in Season 1. Thank you, Thomas Jefferson Tallarico. It's especially sweet when Nika chooses to go with Lucan to Felden and tries to justify it. It's implied she's starting to catch feelings for him, or at least grow attached to him, but at the same time, her reasons do make sense. So she might be able to convince herself she's just being courteous and strategic. That's a pretty realistic depiction of the early stages of a tsundere's crush, and Nika totally is a tsundere. There's not really any denying that. Anyway, it's Sen time. I can't wait for him to totally Sen over all those Voltaris before saying, "You've songed your last war," right to Tigran's face. Roll fucking credits. So after escaping Sendaria, he arrives in a small village named Hogtown. I'm honestly not sure why it's called that since there's almost no mention of pigs in the script, but it's not a big deal and they did include a fair number of pigs in the animation, so good job team. You solved the totally real, totally legitimate, story-ruining Hogtown plot hole.
Thank God it won't have to be addressed in the eventual live-action remake directed by Joss Whedon, or the 4-hour Snyder cut where Sen leads the Jewish people to victory against the Netherlands, I think. I don't know where I'm going with this bit. I'm tired. Sen goes around Hogtown asking for help from the civilians, but he's faced with so much callous disregard you'd think he was talking to a bunch of Andrew Wakefields. Did he clone himself with Hugh Fudenberg's DNA or something? I wouldn't be surprised. Naturally, Sen gets very upset as the reality of the situation is starting to sink in. He's lost Thalius, he's lost most of his family, and he's lost his home. And he doesn't know what to do, so he just falls to his knees and stays there for a moment. It's a damn good moment. Sen doesn't seem to reflect on the events of episode 6 later on as much as he should in my opinion, but I'll give credit to 7 for letting him grieve just this much. Anyway, it's time for some racism. Sen speaks to Timber for a moment about carrying on to ataraxia, then wanders around the village until he runs into a Magnerite being antagonized by the townspeople. That Magnerite is Igneous, a lovable scamp who tags around with him for the rest of the season. As Sen approaches Igneous, an air of suspense takes hold, and for a moment the script tries to trick you into being racist.
Luckily, when David was writing this, he was immune.
Now, despite the seeds of prejudice being planted by Thalius, Sen approaches Igneous with more compassion than most, willing to push past his doubt and speak to him like a normal fucking person, leading to a charming conversation where Igneous autistically infodumps about himself, roasts the villagers, and offers to help Sen find a map to Ataraxia. He even drops the word discant, which is a real word, but I'm not kidding when I say I have never heard it used a single other time in my entire life.
We love Igneous for all this, and I do mean we, because he became a fan favorite after he was introduced. It's not hard to see why, as he's a lovable and funny presence. He provides levity after the emotional hell that was episode 6, and not in a way that feels like he's undermining it.
Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that moment of respite, dumbass, because this next scene hurts. We have Jalkar and Grimm on the run, with Abigail not far behind. The mercenaries run into an Enderman and fight it for the egg, another cool nod toward the significance of Endermen in future seasons. In any case, they win and begin climbing out of the crags, but Abigail catches up and knocks Grimm down with an arrow. Jalkar, deciding he can't be slowed down anymore, abandons him.
I remember the effect this moment had on people. The Songs of War fandom hated Jalkar for this. Hated him. And it's funny because he was generally well liked before he pulled this shit, and then they all flipped on a dime. I actually appreciate the script for this, though. Although Jalkar seems like a fun, morally dubious criminal at first, the rug is pulled out from under the audience and he's revealed to just be, a terrible fucking person the whole time. In case it wasn't clear enough already.
Grimm then fights Abigail, still determined to stop her from reaching Jalkar even though he's fueled by rage. His heightened emotions along with Abigail's quick thinking allow him to trip up in a fight he otherwise probably would have won, leading to a satisfying conclusion no matter what the annoying power scalers back in 2020 who thought Abigail should never have won any fight say about it. We see her mercy as she spares Grimm despite having him at bow point, which sets up another great moment in episode 9 that we will get to when we get to. Just you wait. Anyway, Abigail turns to see 3 Endermen standing and watching, and on that ominous note, episode 7 comes to a close. So we start episode 8 with more epic Igneous autism moments while he's traveling to Biggerton with Sen. He's kind of an exposition machine given the things he's saying, but that is at least an endearing quirk of his, so I'll allow it. Igneous asks Sen about his family, and Sen tells him they're gone, without giving any details. Igneous responds in a way that would probably be inappropriate and tone deaf if he knew the full context, but as is, it's a nice gesture. That being said, Sen smiling at this feels a little strange. The events of episode 6 should still be at the forefront of his mind given how recently they've occurred, so it's hard to imagine he's already finding acceptance and optimism in the aftermath. Maybe there was some other meaning intended behind this smile, but it's not clear in the script, so I can't really speculate on that. Anyway, Jalkar shows up, fresh out of the Tabora Crags and eager for a horse. He tries to steal Timber, but Igneous manages to ward him off with a punch before immediately worrying about hurting him too much. He is oblivious, of course, to the fact that most of the fanbase, including me, wanted him to punch Jalkar several more times, but one is better than none.
Oh, I'm sorry, was that hard to follow? Did that whole bit feel like it came out of nowhere? That's because it kinda does, and Jalkar's presence feels like it's interrupting a scene that doesn't really need it. To be fair, this is to set up a moment later in the episode, but I feel like it could have been better implemented. Maybe Jalkar could have been spotted by the audience while Sen and Igneous were walking around Biggerton, I don't know.
Meanwhile, Lucan makes his report to the Felden officials. The dialogue in this scene is pretty stilted and not all that memorable, but this is a government meeting we're talking about, so I guess it's not that unnatural beyond the fact that it's actually running smoothly. In any case, they assign him to send a directive to Fort Zuka. Why the hell is he being made to do this and not an actual military liaison? Unclear. By the way, there are messenger birds in this universe, and they can accomplish tasks like this with much more efficiency. Granted, I don't know if Eldon has those on hand, so maybe that's not important. Foreshadowing is a lit. Lucan leaves the meeting room and meets up again with Nika, promptly making up something the officials didn't say at all to justify her going with him, implying he also wants to spend more time with her. The lovable scamp, the absolute goofy goober. I can't believe he would do this. But anyway, they have another nice conversation, though it does feel like maybe another line or two could make the scene feel more complete before it ends. Whatever, it's fine. Sen and Igneous walk into a bar. That's not set up for a joke, that's just what actually happens in this scene. While they look around for information on where to find a map, we hear some conversation between civilians about ancient tales, including a reference to the legend of Herobrine. This is cool, even though Bigotry Civilian 1's first line is a tad generic. Background dialogue can be great for world-building purposes, and this isn't half bad in that regard. Anyway, although the bartender does tell Sen and Igneous where to find a map, they're given some trouble by Bigotry Civilian 1, who, to the misfortune of everyone who had him as their favorite character, is in fact racist. So too are most of the bargoers, actually, and Igneous addresses this right after they leave. I like the hints of prejudice we see in this moment, but part of me thinks it would be more powerful in the subtext. Then again, Igneous being a chatterbox does kinda justify him talking about it so openly. Sen and Igneous carry on to Marshall's map shop. I do love the idea of there being an entire shop just for maps, since realistically they'd probably be sold in the bookshop, but that's just a nitpick. Anyway, Marshall requests 50 gold for a map of Ardonia, but then he tries to cheat Sen and Igneous by selling them only a map of Concord. When Sen asks for a map of Ardonia, he doubles the price, but then states it'll be 200 gold, which is notably quadruple the original price and not double. Then another customer comes in and Marshall offers the same map for 50 gold, and when Sen questions him, he states outright the price will be different for him and Igneous. Once they're outside, Igneous remarks on Marshall's prejudice.
This is a surprisingly realistic depiction of systemic bigotry. Much of it can be characterized, if not by open hostility, by an endless stream of inconveniences dished out by the privileged to the marginalized. I think it's a great moment, although I don't like that they drop the subtlety and just have Igneous outright state it's because he's a Magnerite. Like, we know. It was pretty obvious, the line doesn't really need to be there. Or maybe I'm just expecting watchers of a Minecraft animation to be better at reading subtext than I actually should, but who knows.
On a brighter note, enter Abigail. She's on her hunt for Jalkar, and she ends up running into Sen and Igneous, letting them borrow her map for free. We totally stan her for that, and luckily Sen and Igneous are also able to give her clues on where Jalkar's headed before she leaves to pursue him further. This is a pretty neat interaction, and it feels a little more natural and less abrupt than the one with Jalkar. It was cool seeing these characters cross paths, and it builds hype for certain events later on in the story, let's just say. Lucan and Nika, meanwhile, arrive at Fort Zuka. They're greeted by the soldier Alec, who states,
So, Feldon does have messenger birds. Not only do they have messenger birds, they literally just sent one to tell Fort Zuka Lucan was coming with information. So why, in the sweet name of my family, did they not just send the messenger bird to deliver the information in the first place? Actually, you know why. I know why. The writers needed Lucan here so he could interact with Kiyoshi. In fact, the writers giving Lucan unexplained importance in the eyes of the Feldon leadership so he can be wherever he needs to be for the story to happen is a repeated issue in this arc, and it's very sloppy. This isn't just bad because it's a contrivance, it's also bad because it makes Lucan feel less like a real person and more like a plot device. It's not catastrophic or anything, but please avoid this in your work if you can, if you want your characters to feel like, people.
Anyway, here we meet Kiyoshi, my favorite character, and unironically possibly one of my bioawakenings. He's recently become captain of the Feldon Guard, much to Lucan's surprise, and when the two encounter each other, we get some banter alluding to a tumultuous but interesting history between the two. Sounds kinda gay to me, but alright. Kiyoshi, reading the directive, realizes Lucan is to come with his army to Mount Tempest for the attack on the necromancers, much to their mutual chagrin and Nika's amusement. I'm assuming Feldon made that order knowing Lucan could be a valuable informant, which I suppose kinda justifies the whole idea of Lucan being sent to Fort Zuka. But then, why didn't the officials just say that's what they wanted of him instead of making up some senseless bullshit? I don't know, it's just weird. Maybe the government wanted Lucan to think he'd be good to go now so he wouldn't try to escape on the way to Fort Zuka, and that would be interesting commentary on how the prison industrial complex abuses inmates and forces them into dangerous situations without disclosure because it's allowed to disregard their humanity, but there's no way David has the sauce to think that up, so either it was Badger or this whole thing was just a big goof.
Back to Sen and Igneous. Yes, they have a monopoly on this episode, don't worry about it. They're well on their way to Ataraxia and run into a seemingly impassable river. Unfortunately, Magnarites can't swim, but before either of them can really dwell on that fact, they spot a Guardian, which quickly hits Sen with a beam and pulls him forward. Despite Igneous' best efforts to rescue him, we love you man, you tried, Sen is dragged into the water, and on that ominous and quite well executed note, Episode 8 draws its curtains. Episode 9 starts off at the Mahoa docks, where the Felden Guard are preparing their attack on the Necromancers. We get a scene with Lucan and Nika where she confronts him about his time in prison, and like most of their scenes, it's sweet. The two coming to understand that they are both societal outcasts ultimately pulls them closer. It's awesome that the story doesn't judge them for performing their unconventional roles. Lucan's criminality doesn't make him a bad person, and Nika's vigilantism doesn't make her a bad person either. Regardless, great scene, and Lucan finally being separated from Nika is a gut punch after we've seen their bond develop. Hopefully, the next time they meet, it'll be under much better circumstances. We then cut to Kiyoshi and Alec. Alec expresses his fears about the Necromancers, and Kiyoshi reassures him by stating that his 3 years of experience in the army far outweighs anything the Necromancers have to offer, and that he has what it takes to win. See, this line where he very explicitly pauses before bringing up his father, hinting at possible animosity or maybe worse, sounds interesting. I hope you don't want a payoff to that, because it never fucking comes. And I mean never. His father isn't even brought up again after this point, and remember, he's introduced in Season 1, so all his lines were recorded. Presumably, David wasn't planning on changing this, even if he noticed it was a problem. Just like, god damn it man, I'm getting too ahead of myself. Episode 9, which I promise is only retroactively worse because of later seasons, moves on to an unexpected but welcome scene of the Ardoni mourning the victims of the Voltaris attack. This is a minor detail, but I love the fact that the markings of dead Ardoni are carved into their gravestones and that the masters can illuminate them with their staffs. It's such a cool detail about Ardoni culture. It also reminds me of how in Star Wars Andor, the ashes of the people of Ferrix are made into bricks, which literally become the building blocks of the town. This makes me wish I was rewatching Andor instead of reading this script, but whatever. I'm not going to pit a coughing baby against a nuclear bomb, or if I'm being nice, I'm still not going to pit a perfectly healthy baby against a nuclear bomb. Anyway, the Masters and several other Ardoni have convened for a meeting regarding the attacks. They note the attackers were looking for the Prime songs, which Thalius luckily moved prior. One Ardoni, Hadeon, states it's not certain the Voltaris were the attackers, which confuses me a little because you'd think it should be certain. Surely there'd at least be, some sightings of the Voltaris after the fact, right? Did literally no one but Sen survive? The Voltaris would either need massive numbers, which they do not have, or highly advanced technology, or magic, but we know that's just technology for other worlds, to prevent escapees from snitching. I find it pretty hard to suspend my disbelief here, I'm sorry. Master Siderian Mendoris suggests doing nothing, claiming the clans are too weak to attack, but Master Aurelius Nestoris seems to disagree, lamenting on how the Ardoni are being made to bury innocents and lack the courage to fight their killers. This leads Zulius Kaltaris to declare he will confront the Voltaris on Mount Velgrin, and Galadar and Hadeon to offer to join him. I'm not sure why Hadeon is saying the only way to end this threat is to face it, since he literally just said they don't know it's the Voltaris. Buddy, you were arguing the threat you're now saying has to be faced may not even exist in the same scene. What the fuck is actually going on here? This is peak Songs of War sloppiness. The line about the identity of the attackers is not only silly, but also pointless now. Even though the Ardoni apparently don't know the Voltaris attacked them, they just decide it was the Voltaris anyway. Obviously, they have to make that decision because the plot still needs them to go to Mount Velgrin. Guys, it's not that complicated, just don't include the line in the first place. Let's just move on. The decision is made to rally the greatest Ardoni warriors for a counterattack, and Galadar and Zulius step outside so this exchange can happen. I'm not joking, this is actually in the script. They said the name of the thing in the thing. This truly was our Songs of War. Just to be clear, I don't have a problem with title drops. I actually think they're quite nice when done well. I just think this one's a little cheap, and it's kinda funny that it exists at all. Anyway, Zulius fires his Aggressium song, presumably to practice, but, it's really an excuse for a cool transition to the next scene. But, since it definitely is cool, I'll give it a pass. We cut to Sen, who's still in the river. Nice one, Sen. Thankfully, he's rescued when an Elder Guardian shows up and beams him before suddenly throwing him back to the shore. I think that means it verified him so he can pass, but it's very unclear in the script.
In the animation, we actually see Sen's memories being scanned on screen, which makes the scene a whole lot better. The vagueness of the script is just so funny though. Like, you really can't tell what the hell is supposed to be going on here. It's also never really clear why Igneous isn't verified as well. Whatever, point is, they're free to pass, and the Guardians start assembling a bridge for them, which they promptly cross as the scene ends. Now we return to Abigail and Sam, and this scene features the first instance of a deleted line I honestly think the writers should have kept. I don't know how to explain it, but I feel like this adds flavor to the rest of the scene and could have been left in just fine. Maybe that's just me though. Anyway, as they go hunting for more food, Jalkar ambushes them and starts relentlessly attacking Abigail. Unlike his sudden appearance last episode, this actually works given the atmosphere of the scene, and you can really sense Jalkar's desperation in his words and actions. He has been pushed to the edge trying to get the reward for this egg, and it would be fair to say he views Abigail as little more than an insect to be crushed at this point. An insect who keeps bugging him. It's a far cry from how he was all too willing to toy around with her back in episode 4. While Jalkar is starting to really press Abigail, Sam bites his leg and causes him to tumble over the edge, which I do mean literally, but you'd be forgiven for thinking otherwise. In the process, Sam is fatally wounded, alarming Abigail as she rushes to his side. Jalkar takes the dragon egg and makes a run for it while she's distracted. Despite Abigail's pleas, Sam passes away, leaving her enraged, more so than she's ever been before. The scene cuts back to Jalkar on the run before he's hit by an arrow from behind. You know it has to be Abigail from the start, but you're tricked into thinking the fight's back on as Jalkar whirls around and draws his knife, only for another arrow to hit him in the chest and send him to his knees. He drops his knife as Abigail approaches, and before he can say another word, she shoots him a third time and ends his life. Abigail approaches the dragon egg and holds it in her hands, and that's how episode 9 ends.
Right, so I wanted to wait until I was done summarizing that scene to analyze it because I really think it speaks for itself and it deserves to speak for itself. Let's start by talking about Sam's death. Obviously, it's sad, but on its own, I wouldn't call it tragic. I like Sam, but he was always a plot device, not a character. He was a supplement to Abigail, someone to strengthen her characterization and motives. Killing him off in this scene is a great way to raise the stakes and give Abigail a reason to take a life of her own. The killing of Jalkar was deeply disturbing years ago, and it still is. I'm not saying he doesn't deserve what he got, he's a little shit, no doubt about it, but still, the context of this killing fucks me up. His killer is Abigail, one of the kindest people in the story with an unmatched sense of justice. What drives her even more, perhaps, than her sense of justice, is her sense of curiosity and her need for adventure, something that takes her to this moment. She also has to learn the hard way that there's more to the world than her ideals. There is deep-rooted cruelty and there are some real assholes. Having one of the worst assholes, Jalkar, be the one to shatter Abigail's worldview and drive her to commit her first truly unjust act, I mean, that's great. It's great writing. In fact, I think this might be my favorite ending to any of the episodes in Season 1. I like it more than the endings of Episode 5, Episode 6, and even Episode 10, believe it or not. I like it the most because of what it means for Abigail's character. One should expect that moving into Season 2, she should grapple with the reality of what she's done. That would lead to a greater extension of her character arc, and all I have to say to that is, yeah, that would be nice, wouldn't it? Can you get? Alright, Episode 10. We are at the final stretch of Season 1. I am so tired.
We open the episode with Sen and Igneous arriving at Ataraxia, talking about the encounter with the Guardians in the meantime. Ataraxia at first seems to be a small town with Ardonia of various clans, but oops, it's actually a giant fucking city on floating islands. Hell yeah. Also in Ataraxia are Zulius, Hadeon, and a brand new character, Hubris. Zulius and Hadeon are trying to recruit Hubris, but Hubris disagrees with them on the grounds that they aren't taking the threat of the Voltaris seriously enough. He thinks an army must be assembled to defend all of Ardonia, and because Zulius and Hadeon don't, he won't join them. Zulius and Hadeon leave, but luckily Sen overhears the conversation and gives Hubris the validation he needs. As Hubris meets Sen and Igneous, he goes full video game side quest mode and tries to recruit them into the Knights of Ardonia. They hold off on it for now, but make sure to put a pin in this for later.
I don't have much to say about any of this. It's not bad so far, but it's also not particularly good. It's a little confusing that Zulius and Hadeon are here in Ataraxia and then at Mount Valgrind in the same episode, even though the viewer can assume a time skip. Personally, I don't think they needed to be in this scene at all. Hubris could have just had his conversation with a messenger. Unfortunately, the latter few episodes of Season 1 have pretty bad cases of cameo-itis, so that is not to be.
Sen and Igneous travel onward and find a blacksmith, and a very familiar one at that. Enter Gallius Sandaris, the estranged brother of Thalius.
Gallius is a strong and deeply interesting addition to the cast, serving as a very good hook for the next season. The fact that Thalius, the focal character of the first half of the series, has this long-lost brother is wild. The fact that that brother is carrying on his role in the story, although not exactly, we'll get to that, is also deeply fascinating, especially because of the implied dynamic between the two.
It's established that Gallius and Thalius didn't have the greatest relationship, so much so that Thalius never mentioned Gallius in the past, and so much so that when Sen tells Gallius about Thalius' death, his first reaction isn't sadness, but frustration. This comes off as maybe a little harsh in the moment, but having read the entire script, maybe he should have been more harsh. If you think about it, Thalius should have been mourned just as much as Henry Kissinger was when he died, and that's to say a negative amount because he was mocked for being a war criminal. Oops. Nice one, Henry, and nice one, Thali? Oh, that sounds terrible. Obviously, all's not as it seems. Gallius is upset that his brother has died, but he views it as a preventable tragedy, believing if Thalius had stayed away from the Voltaris, he would still be alive. He laments the fact that he is now the last of his family, and it is a heartbreaking moment when he finally expresses his pain after that burst of anger. Carl G. Brooks does an incredible job in the animation, selling the emotions through Gallius' voice, but it's pretty good in script form too. After that, Gallius becomes acquainted with Sen and Igneous. Thankfully, it seems Gallius isn't emitting the same Hitler particles as Thalius in regards to Magnerites. The trio take their conversation downstairs and waste no time discussing important matters. Gallius brings up the coming war, and when he mentions the conflict between Carfin and Cydonia, the two strongest kingdoms, Igneous pipes up, expressing a desire to go to Carfin and help end said conflict, along with the oppression of Magnerites everywhere, apparently. This is set up for an arc in Season 2, and, well, there's a lot to say about that when we get there. In any case, Gallius points Igneous in the direction of a contact of his, Aaron the Fletcher. After saying goodbye to Sen, Igneous leaves for his Season 2 adventure.
You know, I still quite like Igneous, and I'm glad he's here. He's utilized in just the right way to not be an annoyance, which could have been so easy. He's kind of like the Perlito from Puss in Boots 2: The Last Wish of Songs of War. Say that sentence to a Victorian child. He's so respectful and kind to Sen, which is just what's needed after all the bullshit our clanless king has been through.
We now revisit Abigail mourning the death of Sam. She apologizes to him, recognizing what her actions have led to. It's a nice, somber moment, neatly tying up the events of Episode 9. Things, however, go awry as the egg starts to glow and hatches into Luna, Abigail's next animal companion the audience will get to know across the next 2 seasons. She's essentially just Sam, but big and a dragon instead of a dog, which is fine enough for a pet character, but it's a little underwhelming. Whatever. Abigail naming Luna in this scene is sweet, and it helps paint the picture that there is still hope even after the events of the last episode. That being said, I think it'd work better as a post-credits scene. So much of this finale is setting up a lot of horrible shit like the Necromancer War and the Voltaris resurgence. A hopeful note would be best as light at the end of the tunnel and not plopped right in the middle. In any case, we move on to the conclusion of the Felden arc for this season, with the army rushing into the Necrobase. Nika is off on her own in Riverstead, and she starts to sense that something is very, very wrong. But of course, it's all fine. The Felden Guard has things under control. The base is empty. Who would have thought? As it turns out, the Necromancers are striking first with all their might. And as Lucan and Kiyoshi exchange glances in horror, we cut back to Nika as she turns and sees the Necrolord with all his forces descending on the city.
This scene is so well executed. The frequent cuts between Lucan's perspective and Nika's perspective does wonders for building the tension, and once you realize what's happened, you shit yourself. We all owe our thanks to... Fuck, I can't think of any more famous people named Thomas for this bit. We all owe our thanks to Tom Cruise Tallarico.
We return to Ataraxia, where Sen and Gallius are eating and conversing. The topic of the coming war is raised again, and the dialogue here is kinda average and expository, but it's not too bad. At least it leads to a cool montage where Gallius relays the events going on all over Ardonia with a voiceover. We see shots of those events too. The Felden Guard has arrived in Riverstead too late to save it. The Ardonia are riding forth to Mount Velgrin. There are even reports of Luna having hatched that Gallius has already heard somehow. This isn't in the script, but one of my favorite details in the animation is the sheer look of anger on Kiyoshi's face as he realizes the scope of the destruction he's seeing. That's just great. I wish he'd look at me like that. Preferably without the context of massacres, though. Call me lame, but that's a bit of a turnoff. Sen, of course, wants to do what he can to join the fight, and Gallius offers to train him, even if he's not as skilled as his brother. This is another solid setup for the second season. At that, Gallius takes Sen with him to a secret war room he made because part of him believed his brother in spite of the rest. In yet another cool moment, the camera pans out to reveal a stash of weapons as Gallius claims he does not just make any tools, but that he has been preparing for the Voltaris in his own way. And then, the episode turns to Mount Velgrin, and the last scene of Season 1 begins. Thanks for reminding us of Hawkins' deaf dick. The Voltaris are crowding around this large and mysterious energy sphere, as it's described in the script. Their words, not mine. In any case, Tigran tells his clan to stand firm as their plans are realized before Zulius and his followers arrive, demanding an end to the schemes. Tigran taunts Zulius as he draws Thalius' sword, thinking he's not a threat until he spots the rest of the Ardoni. He actually gets worried for a moment before the energy sphere expands and starts to look like a portal, then taunts Zulius again, claiming he's too late.
I'm a big fan of the fact that the audience has no idea what in the French, Italian, German, Spanish, or English hell the Voltaris are trying to do. Your mind gets to run wild with worry in real time along with the Ardoni. It also doesn't feel out of nowhere because we knew the Voltaris were planning something and we knew they wanted the prime songs for it. It's obviously a pretty big deal.
Zulius isn't ready to throw in the towel just yet. I remember thinking his line here was the coolest shit ever put to script. I mean, it's still pretty solid, and oh, who cares, the fight has begun. The fight itself isn't much to write home about, at least with how it's described in the script, seeing as there's literally no detail outside the scuffle between Tigran, Zulius, and Hadeon. It's much more interesting in the animation, credit to Skyfall. Right as Zulius and Hadeon corner Tigran, the portal explodes, breaking the obsidian. It doesn't break in the animation, they probably didn't have the budget, and is now officially open, and through it, all the Ardoni present can see a similar image of Mount Velgrin's peak, just at a different time.
Yeah, there's fucking time travel in Songs of War. It's never really explained or used again. The Voltaris open this portal, and that's a one and done deal. The most you'll ever know about how this works is that the Voltaris have, like, dark magic and stuff. It's not much better than Palpatine coming back from the dead with the explanation that the dark side of the Force is a pathway to many abilities some consider to be unnatural. I remember co-director Sam saying something about how they only wanted time travel for this one instance and never wanted to address the implications again because they would be pretty huge. So that's great, except for one small problem: it sucks. Bringing up something with massive implications once in the plot for one event to happen only to never address it again is lazy writing. It's especially lazy because all they had to do to make this airtight was say it requires a stupidly large amount of energy to do, or magic, whatever works. Just establish it took all 154 years the Voltaris were waiting to build up the magic for this. It is that fucking easy. One fucking throwaway line could have explained this. I'm losing it, man.
I'll give them some credit, though, because this specific utilization of time travel is pretty cool in a vacuum. Two Ardoni are seen fighting through the portal, and it's soon established these are Ingressus and Achillean, the Death Singer and the Tide Singer. In between their battle, Ingressus and Achillean pause to communicate. I think most of their dialogue is adequate, but these first two lines suffer from a serious problem of seeming like they come from a conversation these two have already had multiple times. Like, I'm sorry, does Ingressus not know why Achillean is called the Tide Singer? It's because he turned the fucking tides, man. I think it's fairly intuitive.
I'm fairly certain others have made the same criticism in the past, and I'm gonna continue on that trend. This is an instance of naturalistic dialogue being set aside for dialogue the writers think will sound cool to the audience. They do sound cool in a vacuum, don't get me wrong, but maintaining immersion is so much more important because then the naturalistic and cool lines will hit that much harder. Please just don't make characters say things they would never realistically say just because you think it's badass. I'm speaking from experience here, mind you. I have struggled with the exact same problem in the past.
Anyway, the rest of this dialogue is fine. Them talking about the Prime songs makes sense, I think. There's not much to say about the pretty nondescript fight, but Zillion definitely elevated that shit in the animation. Achillean questions what Ingressus is doing, stating he's already lost. Of course, this battle is taking place right at the end of the Great War. It's the same battle we were told about in the prologue, and the same battle Thalius explained to Sen. Ingressus has lost, in a sense, but not in every sense. And that leads him on a monologue that is both natural and cool, where he compliments Achillean and taunts him for convincing him to enter the Ardoni tournament, setting him down this path in the first place. Fucking chills. This is how you do it, folks. Ingressus admits he's lost for the time being, but threatens he'll be back one day, when Achillean is not there to stop him. Another genuinely bonkers line in a good way. Just as we realize this time travel plot has likely been his plan from the beginning, and that the Voltaris have been operating under his direct orders to set it up in the future, he charges forward and defeats Achillean, knocking him off the edge of the cliff and, presumably, killing him. Tigran, Zulius, Hadeon, and all the others watch on in awe, just like the audience did when the animation came out. How relatable and understandable considering how shocking that sequence was. Ingressus walks toward the portal, his song stripped away by its energy as he approaches.
I don't know why the portal doesn't let songs through. I don't think they ever explain this. It's really just so Ingressus can't have the primes in the present, and also so the story can happen, so, just more lazy writing, I guess.
Setting that gripe aside, the atmosphere is terrifying and almost perfect as Ingressus, the death singer everyone has talked about like a legend to be feared so far, finally steps through the portal. The audience waits to see what will happen next, but they don't get to find out because the episode, and the season, ends there. This moment is just as powerful as I remembered. If you were watching this on March 28, 2020, and you saw Ingressus step through that portal for the first time and the episode just cut to black, you probably shit yourself to the edge of the universe.
Such an absurd way to end the season, but it goes so hard. I remember being so unbelievably hyped for Season 2 after I watched this. How could I not be? There was so much pure, unadulterated hype packed into this episode.
But I will say, the arrival of Ingressus as an active character in the story leads to quite a few annoying trends that kinda cause the unraveling of much of the whole thing for me. But let's not get ahead of ourselves, that's a discussion for the Season 2 and 3 videos. God, I have to do more of this.
Well, now that we're done with this season, I guess one question remains. Do I like Songs of War Season 1 even to this day? The answer is, honestly, yes. It is riddled with a hell of a lot of world-building issues and juvenile writing. That being said, this story shows a lot of promise and a lot of strengths. I do not think it was wrong for the fanbase, including myself and my friend group, to latch onto it so much. I am comfortable calling Songs of War Season 1 fairly decent, if not overall good. It's somewhere between a 6 and 7 out of 10, I think. Congratulations, Tommy fucking Tallarico. You passed. Thanks for watching, everyone. It got exhausting sometimes going through this script and cataloging my thoughts on everything, but I won't say it wasn't an overall fun experience. Revisiting this 5-year-old hyperfixation of mine with all of my conflicted feelings at the forefront has been nothing short of a treat. Stay tuned, stay subscribed, and if you really feel like it, consider supporting me on Patreon. This is Noah, signing off and wishing you all the best. Peace.